I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, and so-called haunted places were just figments of overactive imaginations, until I found the door. It all started when I moved into my late grandfather's house, an old Victorian home that had stood for over a century. I inherited it after his passing, though I hadn't seen him in years. The house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by towering oak trees that seemed to whisper whenever the wind blew. It was the kind of house that had a presence, a weight that pressed down on you the moment you stepped inside. The basement had always been a place of mystery in my family. My grandfather forbade anyone from going down there. Even as a child, I was never allowed to set foot beyond the heavy wooden door that led downstairs. My parents obeyed his wishes, and over time, the basement became a forbidden relic of the past, until now. Armed with nothing but my phone flashlight, I descended the creaking steps into the basement for the first time. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic, clung to my throat. The room was cluttered with forgotten relics, wooden crates, old furniture draped in white sheets, and shelves lined with books that had long since surrendered to decay. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Hidden behind a rusted metal shelf, partially obscured by years of dust and neglect, was a door. Unlike the rest of the house, this door wasn't made of wood. It was metal, smooth and seamless, with no visible handle or keyhole. The only distinguishing feature was a small, engraved symbol at its center, a circle with an eye in the middle. Something about it made my skin crawl. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. Why had my grandfather hidden this? What was behind it? I reached out and ran my fingers over the symbol. The metal was ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver up my spine. Then, to my horror, the door moved. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the basement as the door slid open on its own. A rush of stale, frigid air poured out, carrying with it the scent of something ancient, something dead. Beyond the threshold was a narrow stone passageway, stretching into darkness. The walls were lined with symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep into the rock. The air felt heavier here, as if I had crossed into a place untouched by time. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to seal the door, and forget I had ever found it. But something deeper, some primal curiosity, urged me forward. Step by step, I entered the passage. The further I walked, the colder it became. My breath came out in misty puffs, and my fingers ached from the chill. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the silence. A whisper. It was faint at first, like a breath against my ear. I spun around, but there was no one behind me. The whisper came again, this time from ahead, beckoning me deeper. I should have turned back. But I didn't. As I reached the end of the passage, I stepped into a circular chamber. The walls were covered in old, faded tapestries, each depicting eerie, faceless figures standing before a great, swirling void. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it sat a small, black box. It pulsed. Not like a heartbeat, but like something alive, something waiting. A wave of nausea washed over me as I reached out. The closer my fingers came to the box, the louder the whispering grew. Dozens of voices overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Then I touched it. A blinding pain shot through my skull, and I collapsed to my knees. The whispering turned to screams, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I saw them, figures standing in the darkness, watching, waiting. Their eyes were hollow voids, and their mouths stretched open in silent agony. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in my basement, the door to the passageway gone. No sign it had ever been there. The box was in my hands, but something was different. Something had followed me back, and it was still whispering. I woke up on the cold concrete floor of my basement, the box clutched in my trembling hands. My body ached, and my head throbbed with a dull, pulsing pain. The hidden door, the one I had stepped through, was gone. No seam in the wall, no trace of the passageway I had entered. Had I imagined it? No. The box was proof. It was small, made of a black material that felt neither wooden nor metallic. It was impossibly smooth, and yet, the longer I held it, the more it seemed to pulse beneath my fingers, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The strange symbols etched onto its surface glowed faintly in the dim basement light. And the whispering. It hadn't stopped. At first, it was faint, like a distant conversation happening just out of reach. Then it grew louder, murmuring voices overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Some voices were frantic, desperate, while others carried a chilling calmness, like something ancient watching me from the shadows. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short gasps. The walls of the basement felt like they were closing in, pressing against me. I had to get out. Clutching the box to my chest, I rushed up the stairs, throwing open the door to my house. Sunlight spilled in through the windows, and for a brief moment, I felt relief. The house was normal. Safe. But that illusion shattered almost instantly. The moment I stepped into my living room, I saw it. A shadow, standing at the far end of the hallway. It wasn't solid. It flickered like a glitch in reality, its shape shifting, its limbs stretching unnaturally. It had no face, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me, as if it was studying me. The whispering grew louder. My fingers tightened around the box as I stumbled backward. My instinct screamed at me to run, to flee the house, but I was frozen in place, trapped in a silent standoff with the entity. And then it moved. Not by walking, no, it simply glitched forward, like a broken film reel skipping frames. One moment, it was at the end of the hallway, the next it was closer. Then closer still. I turned and bolted for the front door, my heart hammering in my chest. My fingers fumbled with the lock, but just as I wrenched the door open, darkness. Not just a blackout, this was something else. Something wrong. The warm afternoon light vanished in an instant, replaced by a suffocating void. It was as if the world outside had been swallowed whole. I staggered back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. I turned around, and the shadow was gone. But I wasn't alone. A voice, clear and distinct, whispered directly into my ear. "You shouldn't have taken it." I spun around, but there was nothing there. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away. The walls of my house seemed to pulse, the very air vibrating with unseen energy. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. The stairs to the second floor seemed like the only option. I took them two at a time, my legs burning with panic-driven adrenaline. As I reached the top, I slammed my bedroom door shut behind me, locking it. The whispering didn't stop. It was inside my head now. I could hear the voices more clearly, their words forming fragmented phrases. "Return it! Open the door! It sees you!" My hands trembled as I looked at the box. I needed to get rid of it. Whatever I had taken from that hidden chamber, whatever I had disturbed, wasn't going to let me go. But as I turned to throw it out the window, I made a terrible mistake. I opened it. The latch clicked, and the lid lifted with an unnatural smoothness. At first, I saw nothing, just endless blackness inside, deeper than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't empty. It was a void, a bottomless abyss. And then, something moved inside it. A skeletal hand, long and thin, reached up from the darkness. Its fingers twitched, stretching unnaturally, the joints bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Then another hand. And another. The whispering turned to shrieks. A face began to emerge from the abyss, a hollow, featureless visage, its mouth stretched wide in an eternal, silent scream. I slammed the lid shut. The room shook violently, the air thick with the scent of burning metal. My vision blurred, and for a brief moment, reality itself seemed to unravel. Shadows crawled along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that twisted and writhed. Then silence. The shaking stopped. The whispers faded. I gasped for air, my hands still clutching the box so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The house was still again. The lights were normal. Had I imagined it? No. The box was still there, still pulsing faintly in my hands. I knew then that this wasn't over. I had brought something back with me, and it wasn't going to let me go. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in my bed, knees drawn to my chest, gripping the cursed box like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. My mind kept replaying what had happened, the shadowy figure, the whispering, the thing inside the box. I had made a mistake. A terrible mistake. The voices had stopped for now, but the silence was worse. It felt like I was being watched, like something just beyond my vision was waiting. My bedroom, once my sanctuary, felt foreign and unsafe. The air was heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Every sound made me flinch, the creak of the house settling, the distant howl of the wind outside. But then, just past midnight, something changed. The box moved in my hands. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then I felt it, a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic thumping against my fingers. I nearly dropped it. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, bury it, anything to be rid of it. But some horrible part of me was drawn to it, compelled to understand what it was. I needed answers. For the first time since this nightmare started, I thought about my grandfather. He had owned this house for decades. He must have known about the hidden door, about this thing. Why had he kept it locked away? Why had he never spoken about it? Desperate, I grabbed my phone and started searching through my grandfather's old emails and documents. Most of it was unremarkable. Letters, receipts, reminders. But then I found something strange. A folder labeled, "Do not open." My fingers trembled as I clicked it. Inside were handwritten notes and old photographs. The first page stopped me cold. "If you are reading this, it means the door has been opened. It means the box has been found. And it means you are not alone anymore." My blood ran cold. I scrolled further, scanning his words, my breath quickening with every sentence. "The entity inside the box is not bound to this world. It does not belong here. I trapped it decades ago. But it is patient. It will whisper. It will call to you. It will try to escape." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. The whispering had already begun. Then I reached the last note, scribbled hastily in uneven handwriting. "Under no circumstances should you open the box." My stomach dropped. I had already opened it. The second I let that realization sink in, a loud knock echoed through my house. It wasn't from the front door. It came from inside, somewhere downstairs. I froze, listening. The air in my room felt heavier, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. Then, another knock. And another. It was coming from the basement. A cold dread washed over me. No, I wasn't going back down there. Not after what I had seen. Not after I had barely escaped. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen flickered violently, then died in my hands. The battery had been full. The whispering returned. Not distant this time. Right. Behind. Me. I turned, heart hammering, and saw something in the mirror across my room. A reflection that wasn't mine. The figure in the mirror was standing where I sat, holding the box just as I was, but it wasn't me. Its face was blurred, its head tilted slightly, as if studying me. Its grip on the box was tighter, fingers too long, too sharp. Then, slowly, it smiled. A slow, twisted grin that stretched far beyond what was humanly possible. The whispering turned into a screech. I screamed, throwing the box away from me. The second it hit the floor, the entire house shook. The lights flickered, the walls groaned, and the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in misty puffs as an unbearable pressure built around me, squeezing my chest, my skull, my very thoughts. Then silence. I looked around, gasping for breath. The reflection in the mirror was gone. The shaking had stopped. But the box was open again. I hadn't touched it. Inside, something stirred. A long skeletal hand slowly rose from the darkness. Fingers stretched, cracked, as if awakening from centuries of slumber. Then an eye opened in the abyss. A massive, pupilless eye, staring directly at me. My vision blurred. My ears rang. And before I could move, before I could scream, the shadow lunged forward. And everything went black. When I woke up, I was no longer in my bedroom. The world around me was distorted, like I had fallen through a crack in reality itself. I was lying on cold stone, my face pressed against the ground, and I could feel the rough texture against my skin. The air was thick, damp, and smelled of something old, something decayed. I tried to push myself up, but the weight of the air was pressing down on me, as though invisible hands were pushing me back. Every inch I moved felt like an eternity. My heart was racing, my chest tight with panic, but I forced myself to breathe. I had to keep moving. I had to get out of whatever nightmare I had fallen into. I looked around. I was in a vast, dark space, the walls stretching up beyond my vision, obscured by shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The faintest glow illuminated the room, but it wasn't light. It was a sickly green hue, pulsing like the glow from a dying ember. The very air seemed to shimmer, as if the fabric of this place was beginning to tear apart. But there was something else. Something worse. A shape loomed in the distance, slowly coming into focus. It was not human, nor was it any creature I recognized. It was large, a towering figure made of shadows and light. It seemed to distort the very space around it, its form shifting, ever-changing, as if it was trying to remember what it was supposed to look like. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in the oppressive silence of the room. The whispers had stopped, and in their place, a low hum filled the space, vibrating through my bones. I tried to back away, but I couldn't. Something was holding me in place, rooting me to the spot. The creature moved closer, its form twisting unnaturally. Its shape was like smoke, curling and unfurling in the air, but within the smoke, there were faces, pale, contorted faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. The faces were alive. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This thing, this creature, was not merely a shadow. It was a trap, a prison, holding the souls of those who had been foolish enough to come here. The faces were all the people who had tried to open the box before me, all the people who had gotten too close to the door I had found in my basement. They were watching me. I felt their eyes on me, pulling at me, drawing me deeper into the abyss. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I felt the walls of this place closing in on me. The creature's form solidified in front of me, towering over me like a giant. Its face was the size of a mountain, black as pitch, with glowing, hollow eyes that stared down at me with an intelligence that chilled me to my core. It had no mouth, but I could feel its presence speaking to me, seeping into my mind. "You should not have come." The voice was deep, echoing through my skull like 1,000 whispers all at once. I fell to my knees, the weight of the words pressing down on me, suffocating me. "You are mine now." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare, with no escape in sight. The creature's form began to ripple, as though it was folding into itself, and then, without warning, the ground beneath me shifted. I was falling. I tumbled through the air, weightless, spinning. The walls blurred, and the faces of the trapped souls flashed past me. Their expressions were frozen in an eternal state of fear and agony, as though they had been here for eons, waiting for someone else to join them. Then, just as suddenly, I landed. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. My head spun, and for a moment, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I was back in my basement. But it was different now. The walls were covered in the same symbols I had seen in the hidden passageway. The air was thick with the same frigid cold. The box was there, sitting in front of me, its lid wide open. And the voices, the whispering, returned. But now, it wasn't just whispering. It was speaking. "It's too late. You can't escape. We are always watching." I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. I had to get away. I had to find a way out of this. But every step I took only seemed to drag me further into the nightmare. The basement, the house, everything around me felt like it was part of the creature's domain, part of its endless, shifting prison. And then, something shifted in the shadows. A figure appeared in the corner of the room, a silhouette against the darkness. It was familiar, too familiar. It was my grandfather. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and sunken, and his mouth was stretched in a grotesque grin. He stepped forward slowly, as if moving through water, his footsteps eerily quiet. "I told you to never open it," he whispered, his voice a cold echo in my mind. "Now you'll join us." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The box began to hum again, louder this time, as if reacting to his presence. My body felt like it was being pulled towards him, towards the darkness he represented. The shadows swirled around him, clinging to his form, feeding on him. And then I realized the creature was no longer just in the shadows. It was the shadows. It had always been the shadows. My grandfather was nothing more than another vessel for it, a hollow shell carrying the will of the thing that had been watching me. I was trapped. There was no escape. And I was going to be next. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My grandfather, no, the thing wearing his face, was getting closer, the shadows swirling around him, curling up his body, reaching out to me like a mass of dark, hungry tendrils. His grin twisted wider as he came closer, his eyes empty and hollow, watching me with a disturbing familiarity. "It's time!" His voice echoed, barely a whisper, but it felt like it was inside my head, bouncing off the walls of my mind. The words were a cold, harsh command, chilling me to the bone. I tried to move, tried to fight, but it was no use. The air was thick with the creature's presence, and the shadows wrapped around my legs like chains, holding me in place. My feet were glued to the floor, unable to take a single step. I could feel the darkness tightening around me, pulling me in. I was being drawn into the same trap that had ensnared my grandfather, and the countless others before me. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the lost souls filling the air, their cries and pleas mixing with the horrible hum that vibrated through my chest. Their pain was unbearable, like 1,000 screams trapped in a never-ending loop, begging for release. I could feel their hands reaching out to me from the darkness, their cold fingers brushing against my skin. "Help us!" A voice called from the shadows, its tone pleading, desperate. I couldn't take it. I couldn't bear to be a part of this, to be consumed by the same thing that had taken my grandfather. And then, something snapped inside me. A spark of defiance. A voice, my own, screamed inside my head. I won't become like them. I won't be trapped in this hell. The box. The cursed box. I knew, in that moment, what I had to do. I looked toward the open box, lying on the floor before me. It hummed, vibrating with the same energy that had kept me imprisoned here. The lid was wide open, as if inviting me to step forward to make the final choice. The thing inside the box, whatever it was reaching for me again, but this time I wasn't going to let it. I had no idea how I knew, but I felt it deep in my gut. The box wasn't just a prison, it was a gateway. It was the key to this entire nightmare. The whispers, the shadows, the entity that had been stalking me, they all fed on the power of the box. I had to close it. I forced myself to move, struggling against the suffocating pull of the darkness. Every step was like walking through thick mud, my body fighting me at every turn, but I pushed forward, inch by inch, until I reached the box. The shadowy figure of my grandfather was right behind me now, its grip on me almost tangible. It was trying to drag me back, to keep me from my goal. But I refused to let it win. With trembling hands, I grabbed the edges of the box. The thing inside recoiled, its presence suddenly pulling back, as if sensing my intent. I could feel it, the pressure building in the room, the very air crackling with energy. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. No! The voice of my grandfather howled, a rasping, inhuman sound that sent shivers down my spine. Don't close it! You'll be trapped forever! But I didn't listen. I slammed the lid down. The force of it made the entire room shake, the shadows recoiling as if they had been struck. The creature screamed, a high-pitched wail that pierced my eardrums, as if the very existence of the thing inside the box was being torn apart. But the lid was shut. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the ground beneath me cracked open, a deep rumbling like the earth itself was splitting apart. I staggered back, almost falling as the floor buckled beneath my feet. The walls trembled, and the air felt lighter, less suffocating. The oppressive weight that had held me captive for so long began to lift. And then, just like that, everything stopped. The shadows retreated. The whispers fell silent. The oppressive cold that had clung to the house faded away. I was left standing in the basement, trembling but free. I took a deep breath, the air suddenly feeling fresher, cleaner. It was over. The box was closed, and with it, the curse had been broken. But the silence felt wrong. It was too quiet. I looked around the room, my heart still racing, still unsure of what had just happened. The basement was empty now. The shadows were gone, and the oppressive presence that had loomed over me for so long had vanished. But there was still something. I turned toward the door, the one I had first found hidden behind the old wooden shelves. It was ajar, just slightly, as if someone, or something, had passed through it. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that, even though the immediate danger had passed, the house still held its secrets. The door hadn't opened on its own. The thing behind it hadn't disappeared entirely. It was still out there somewhere. But I was no longer afraid. Because I knew one thing for certain. I had survived. The box was closed. The entity inside had been sealed away, at least for now. And whatever secrets the basement held, whatever horrors still lingered within the walls of the house, I was ready. I had faced the darkness, stared it in the eye, and I had come out alive. And as I left that basement for good, I knew one thing. Some doors should never be opened. But when they are, you have to be prepared for what's on the other side. And I was. For now.